Welcome back. Today we have to think about how to interact with our players. And again, there are many different ways you can do this. I stick to a very simple implementation, just using the terminal. So basically I want the player to interact with our terminal here. But how to do this and actually where to implement these particular commands. I think it would not be too good to use the game class because it's already getting quite busy, and it's not necessarily the task of the game class to display the game. So I think it might be helpful to have a separate display class. So what I suggest to do is I suggest to add one more class to our game. Let me just state here, determines display class. So I just start here class display. We have to think what we actually do in here, and I call this display to be consistent. Save as. Okay. So in here I want to interact, yeah. So the display class, which actually doesn't need really tests because I will immediately see whether it works or it doesn't work. I don't have to really explicitly test that. So the display class will run the interaction between our back-end game and the players. I just import this now into my main and think about how we reorganize this a little bit and simplify it. Okay, let's start. Now the first thing to do, I think, is to have a welcome screen. Yeah, so when I initialize the display class, I think it would be kind of nice to start with a display of a welcome screen. So the best thing to do is simply to use a dunder init method. So once I initiate a display instance, I would simply do something. And what I want to do is I simply do a print function. And in here I do a docstring, so I can go over several lines and do some fancy welcome screen. Yeah, so I can do something really fancy. Of course, you can do it as you wish. I do something like this. So that's good old school. I might copy paste that a few times. Here we go. And here we go, and here we go. So we do some fancy stuff. And in here, let's do something even better. So here we are. Oops, I have to be careful, otherwise I have to use a raw string. Let's be careful with it, and I'll just call this here welcome to Blackjack. So let me just do something like this, and here we go, and complete our little art. We can just, for the fun of it, yeah, created 1982, because this is exactly how it looks. Yeah, you see, it can be such a creative exercise. Okay, so now that should display once we initialize it, and the first task is to interact and simply ask, well, do you want to play this game? Yeah, so that's the first thing I want to do. So how do we do this? We just start an instance method here and just call this add players. Just add some space here. Good, so let's try this. And here we just maybe ask first for the number of players. That makes sense. So make a note here. Ask for number of players. So here we just would enter a number, which is input. We have used that before, and you have a prompt here where it states enter number of players, and then we give it a space. So number should be then the one which is entered, so I can work with it. Of course, I always have to now make sure that I don't put in some rubbish, so it would be useful to check whether the number is actually a number, yeah, to make sure it's actually an integer. Otherwise, well, we should force people to re-enter the number. Yeah, so here we do a little check whether a number has been entered. So let's do that here using a while loop. While not number is digit. So if the number I put in is not an actual digit, so it's not an actual number, then I have to do it again. So I would make a print statement here and say, please enter an integer. So that's fine. And then I would say number again, so I would just repeat that. Yeah, so that is one way of doing this, and that hopefully should work. Okay, also have in mind that anything you enter is always by default a string, yeah, so that's something to consider, but this should work. Let me just run this and check how this works out. Okay, I go in here, I clean up here a bit. We don't really need any of that. We might actually also, for the time being, let me just comment this out. I might use that later. And just we start the game here, and what we do is we generate a display. Let's call this display is equal to display. This is the first thing we do, and then we add players. So here we add players, and what I just call this list players is equal to, yeah. Let me just wait for it. At the moment we don't return anything yet, so let's do this. Display add players. We are not yet complete. Later we work on this a bit more. Okay, let me just run this. Python main.py. Okay, so we have a fancy thing coming up here. It doesn't look too great. Enter the number of players. Here we are. So, okay, what can we do? Let's put in R. Okay, please enter an integer. Should spell it correctly. 2. That works. It's out. Okay, good. Let's tidy up a bit here. So please enter. That should be enter. Also, this is not displayed very nicely. I think it's a bit too much, so we cut this down a bit. Let's try this again. I think it's a bit too much. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, now that looks better. Yeah, so that is that's pretty proper. Okay, again I ignore this, I just type in rubbish, I type rubbish in again, then an integer. Fine, so we are out. Yeah. So at the moment it doesn't do much, it just asks you to type in a number. If you don't type in a number, it repeats the request until you type in a number. So that's fine. Okay. Now the thing is, if we look at the number itself, the number is a string, because this is how the input always works. You get a string, so we have to first convert a string to integer. We know how to do this. It's simply number is equal to int number. I simply reassign that. Yeah? So again, that's perfectly fine to do. Otherwise I have to introduce one more local variable. I don't really want to do this. I just convert using this line where I reassign number to the converted string to integer using the int function. Good. Now we could say there should be a maximum number of players. This is up to you, but I specify a maximum number of players. So I say, okay, if it's more than 4 players, it's enough, because when we are running out of cards at one point, so I might just then print a message that, okay, sorry, the maximum number of players is 4. So I just simply make this statement. What I then can do is I simply override this. Yeah, I just say, okay, if you put in more than 4, I just force it down to 4. That is it. Yeah. Good. So that should work. Let's run this again. Okay, if I put in 7, okay, that's fine. So maximum number should be 4. It should change to that. Okay, I don't know. Run it again. 4. That's fine. It works. So that is quite nice. Okay, the next thing to do is to ask, of course, for your name. Yeah, so ask names and put all the players into maybe a list to give it more structure. So we can do here ask for names and put players in list, which we can use later for display purpose. Yeah, so I can do something like, we could also actually, when we do the dunder init, we could do this here as well, but it doesn't really matter. Let's do it here, list players. I just start with as an empty list, and then I add players to it. Of course, we have now the number of players, so it determines how many times I actually ask. So for, I can just leave it like this, 4 in range, because I don't really use the index. So I go up to number, it excludes number, it starts at 0, so it asks exactly the right number of times, what is your name? And I simply call this name is equal to input, and again it's the prompt. I use a formatted string. Maybe it's not bad to actually put in an index, because I might not use it in my formatted string. It's a better idea. So player 1. Yeah, player 1 of course would be, if I put in this placeholder ID X, would be player 0, because this is how Python counts. So it's better to actually add 1 to it, which I can do. Please enter your name. And of course, once this person enters the name, I could then implement the player class. So I could do this, and I can do at the same time also add the player to the list. Yeah, so I can do something like this. Again, I do the append function here, and I can say player, and I pass in name, because any input anyway is a string, so that should work. And now the thing is, this add players should return something, the list of players. Yeah, so that should be returned, which I can then use later for all sorts of display purpose. Okay, so that looks quite nice. Let's see whether it actually works. Okay, let me just start this again. So number of players, I type in 6, it ignores that. Yeah, sorry, maximum number is 4. Player 1, please enter your name. Let's put in Sue. Okay, and whoops, and we get out. Okay, we have a mistake in display.py line 37. Yeah, player is not defined. Okay, that's our fault, because we haven't actually told what player is. So what we need to do here is we have to import player. So from player import player. Okay, let me check whether this is fixing it. Okay, how many players I have? I have only 2 players. I put in Sue, I put in Tom, and we are out. Fine, so it works. That's pretty good. Of course, it's not massively exciting, I have to be honest. Of course, now the next step is we have to put the cards in the first round, and we have to make this talk to the game class as well. So anyway, I can already here add from game import game, because this is exactly what we will need in a minute. Okay, so now we have added the players, and now we can start the game basically. So I use the next method is play first round, and in here I pass the list of players which I got already as a return from the previous one. So I can take that here and go to the main and say here I play first round. Okay, I do this and I do display, and I set it's simply the list players. I can just use the same name, it doesn't matter, you can change that. So I have a return value, this is what I wanted to do before, and I pass in the list of players into the next method. So that should do it. Okay, here we are. Good. So what do we want this to do? So of course now we have to start, in fact, the game. We have to add the players to the game. We have to start the first round, so we need also the deck, and we need the card, which I just might already put in here. So from card import card. Okay, from deck import deck, and now we actually do what you have seen here in a quite a similar way. Yeah, so we do something very, very similar. Just copy paste that, put this in here, move that a bit and make it active. Oops, here we are. So we start the game, which is the game class. We add players. Now of course we already know how many players we have because it was determined before. We have list of players as an argument, which is determined in the previous call. So how do we add the players? Well, we have the add players method on the game instance. So this is the instance method, but of course we have now several players, so we have to start looping in here. So for player in list players, yeah, because this is where we get our list from, just by asking people how many players do you have, what is your name, and then we basically can add the players to our game using the instance method add player on the game class. And then we start the first round. Yeah, we pass in as before deck and card. And now it might be useful actually to show the hand for each player. Yeah, so show hands for each player, and obviously maybe also the score. Yeah. Okay, let's do this again. We are now in the for loop. We could simply continue with this loop here. In fact, to some extent we are a bit redundant because we have this game loop as well, because but we could change that, doesn't matter. We have to at one point refactor the code, make it a little bit more precise, but we could, for instance, loop now over both lists. It would work in the same way, because this is how we constructed it. And we can now go to game.players, because that's basically what we have done. We moved it into the game class. We have the players also stored here, but this is more consistent with our approach. And then we could simply print here a formatted string. Exactly, and we can say that player dot name has blah blah blah. So it's the first card, has player dot hand. It's a list, so I can do an indexing. So it's the first hand, and blah blah blah. Here we are. I just copy paste that and go to the next hand. So these are the two cards basically stored in hand, as we know. And then we can say the score is, just do it here, player.score. Okay. Good, so we do the first round. That hopefully should work. It looks promising. Display first round. So you see it's kind of quite neat, and I can actually get rid of all of that. It's quite condensed. I don't even have to import that much, honestly speaking, at this point. We can discuss this maybe later. But let's see. Okay. Alright. Cannot import card from card. Okay, that sounds like a stupid typo. Yes, it has to be capital because I always use capital upper camel case for classes. Okay, that's fine. Silly me. Here we are. Welcome to Blackjack. How many players do we want to have? I'll type in rubbish. I will be asked again. We put in 3 players. Player 1, please enter your name. It's again Sue. It's again Amy. I should spell it properly and say Tim. Here we are, and we have, for Sue has a 8 of diamonds and a 5 of clubs. The score is 13. And Amy has 4 of hearts, 8 of clubs, score is 12. Tim has a jack of clubs and a king of clubs, and the score is 20. That's pretty good. That is good. That's quite nice, yeah. So that's a nice implementation for the first round. Of course, now we have to start asking people, do you want to have one more card? That's the next step, and I see you next time.